Hello art friends, my name is Fleshwad, and today I'm doing something I've been wanting to do forever. A while back I used to have a lot of sound effects in my story videos. You guys dug them, I dug them. It really added an extra layer to my videos and to the stories. Maybe someday I will bring those back, but for today I wanted to share with you the website that I would use for the sound effects. It's called freesounds.org and it's a free website, very user-friendly. You basically look up the sound you want, and there are multiple choices to choose from. Then you download it. Some sounds do require a link to them in your description box, but most don't. On this website, there is a spot to generate random sounds. I always wanted to generate 5 to 6 random sounds and use those sounds to make a horror story. So come along with me and let's pick some random sounds. So here's the website. You click sounds and give me a random sound. So I'm gonna do this 6 times in a row, no cheating. I might only end up using 5 of the sounds, but 6 just to have one extra sound in there in case I don't like every single sound that I get. So here we go. And here's the first sound, vintage footsteps. This is actually perfect for a horror story. Okay, that's creepy. I'm creeped out. Ooh. So that's a really good first sound. These are high quality copies of original nitrate optical Hollywood sound effects from the 1930s and 40s, transferred to full track tape in the early 1970s. So I'm gonna go ahead and download it and then we'll click another random sound. Okay, so now that that's been downloaded, I'm going to click give me another random sound. And we have the sample workshop. So this is a synth string ensemble multi-sample in fourths made on Reason. I have no idea what any of those words mean. That's creepy. Isn't that creepy? Okay, I love that. I'm gonna download it and then we'll click another random sound. So here's another music sound, I guess. That's alright. That kind of gives me like alien vibes, like a big insect. I like that. I like that sound. So I'm going to go ahead and download it and then click give me another random sound. So here's our fourth sound and it looks like it's opening a bottle with a zish. Not sure what that is. See, here's one of the ones where I was saying they would prefer if you could tag their Instagram somewhere in the description. Simple things like that. So let's go ahead and listen to this sound. It's very low. I don't know if I'd use this one, so I think I will still get the 6 sounds, but I'm gonna go ahead and download it anyways. And getting another random sound. This says Entrevista Benes. Oh my god, I have no. This one is 4 minutes long. Okay, it's gotta be like a song, a sound or something. Let's see. Oh, it's just talking. Okay, so here's the final sound. It says cottage, summer, birds, voices, wind and trees, water. It's a lot of, I guess, ambience, soundscape, field recording. Let's take a listen. It's 2 minutes long. Like this, it's very peaceful. It also gives a setting to the story. So I'm gonna go ahead and download this one, write the story up, and then I'll see you guys when it's finished. Yet another summer in this dusty, vine-infested cottage. I looked over at my brother, who was enjoying his last few minutes of internet freedom. This would be our second summer at our grandparents' cottage. Mom and Dad would say this was for our own good, to give our eyes a break from the little LED glass screens. But I knew what they really wanted was a break from us. Don't get me wrong, I loved our grandparents and spending time with them definitely wasn't a punishment. I just wish it didn't have to last our whole summer break. The road to the cottage was long and narrow. Only one car fit and there were no streetlights, so basically good luck in the ungodly hours of the night, where no light could be seen except that of the moon guiding you. After a couple of hours of driving, we had finally arrived at our summer destination. The cottage looked as decrepit as ever. The weeds were up to our knees and there were cracks in the bricks deep enough for insect families to live entire lives in. My brother and I shot quick glances of annoyance to each other before unloading our bags. Even though it was late at night, our grandparents sat in their creaky rocking chairs, lit only by a tiny sliver of lamplight, waiting for us to walk the dark dirt path to their cottage. We reached the stone stairs and said our angry goodbyes to our parents, along with our sad goodbyes to any technologic device. Our parents almost seemed to skip to the car on their way out. "Hello, children," our grandma greeted us. "Hey, Grandma, Grandpa," my brother and I said in unison. Our grandpa said no words, but just smiled and gave us both a tiny hug. He was never much for words. Grandma showed us to our bedrooms and told us to unpack a little before falling asleep. She shut the door and left us to our own devices, just not technological devices. Our room was a decent size for both of us. It had 2 beds, 2 dressers, each adorned with cheap lamps, and 2 windows on each side. There wasn't much else in the room besides dust. There was a lot of dust. We quickly unpacked and got ready to settle in for our first night. I brought along a couple of books to tide me over for the next 3 months. After unpacking, I decided to get a couple chapters in, and my brother decided to go to sleep. I sat on my bed and from time to time would glance out the window to my left. This dusty window scene was mostly fields of knee-high grass, with a small rotting shed in the middle. Nothing too spectacular, but I have to admit it was a peaceful view. Somewhere in between pages and field glances, I dozed off. I woke up in the middle of the night to a loud chittering noise. My lamp was still on, but my brother's was off and he was still asleep. There wasn't a clock in the room, so I didn't know the time, but judging by the darkness of the sky, I'd say it was very early in the morning, 2 to 3-ish. I once again heard the loud chittering, something like 1,000 insects flapping their wings at once, over and over again. I stood up and looked out the window. It was dark, but I could see very faintly my grandma standing in the field. Only the top half of her was visible, the bottom half swallowed by the grass. I watched her for a couple of seconds, curiously observing her, when I heard the bedroom door creak to my side. I turned quickly to see my grandma standing in the doorway, the hall light behind her creating an unsettling shadow in the room. "Go to sleep, dearie," she spoke, almost in a low hissing noise. "It's late." And with that, she shut the door and the shadow disappeared with her. I quickly spun around again to the field where I had just been watching her, but she was obviously gone. I turned my lamp off, got under the covers, and went to sleep. The next morning, I told my brother what happened, what I had seen, but he told me I was just tired from the trip. He must be right. There would be no logical explanation for what I thought I had seen. We got dressed, brushed our teeth, and groggily went downstairs for breakfast. There was a slight, disgusting smell coming from the kitchen, but once I got there, nothing seemed out of ordinary, and no one else seemed to smell it, so I shrugged it off. Breakfast was sunny-side-up eggs and bacon, with a bowl of buttered biscuits in the middle of the table. Grandpa was sitting there, possibly eating, hiding behind a crisp newspaper. We sat down in front of our respective plates and began eating. 2 bites in, I noticed a weird crunching texture. Sure, bacon was crunchy, but eggs usually weren't. I inspected the eggs, careful to not let anyone catch on. What I saw shook me. I saw maybe a dozen of little bugs baked into the eggs, and not full-bodied bugs either. They were chopped up into tiny, tiny pieces. So tiny, one might have not even noticed them. I turned to my brother, but he had already finished his plate and was grabbing a biscuit. I excused myself from the table, making up some lame excuse about a stomachache, and ran back to the room to wait for my brother. I must have dozed off, because when I woke up, it was nighttime outside. Weird. Hadn't it just been morning? How could I have fallen asleep? I turned to my brother's bed, but he wasn't there. I stumbled out of bed and went to my grandparents' room. I turned the doorknob, but it was locked. I decided I'd check the living room before waking them up, but once I had reached the living room, I noticed the front door was wide open. I went to the door. It was dark, the only light coming from the guiding moon. I quickly scanned the field and noticed a light coming from the rotting shed. It was possible that my brother had went off to explore and lost track of the time without the use of our cellular clocks. I slipped on my shoes and descended the stone steps. The shed was about half a mile from the cottage, and in my opinion, something that should have been torn down a long time ago, because honestly, it just gave me the creeps. I stumbled through the knee-high grass, getting the heebie-jeebies thinking of what little bugs could be crawling in there. Upon reaching the shed, I noticed multiple shadows inside, but none were moving. Something inside of me told me to turn around. It told me to go back to my grandparents' cottage, to walk back to my room and get under my cozy, dusty quilt. It told me to forget about this and to just go back to sleep, but I ignored it. I walked to the side of the shed and decided to peek through the wood. Rotten and warped from years of nature, I saw my brother, but something was wrong. No, everything was wrong. His eyes were pale, pupils almost gone. His skin was half blue and veiny, and his mouth was stretched so unbelievably wide. But that wasn't even the worst part. Inside of his mouth were tens and tens of tiny round insect-like eggs, and his body was wrapped up in what could only be described as a cocoon. I let out a gasp, definitely louder than I should have, but can you blame me? I started to hyperventilate, but then took a second to calm my breathing. I peeked further into the shed and saw multiple cocooned bodies. One of them even looked like my grandpa. Whatever had done this was gone for now. I softly tiptoed to the front of the shed and opened the door. It creaked a bit, but nothing harsh. Once the door had been opened all the way, I was hit in the face with a foul odor. I could smell it slightly from outside, but now that I was in the shed, it was almost unbearable. I closed the door and quietly ran to my brother and started to tear the cocoon apart. I'm not too proud of this next part, but I know he'd have done it for me. I started shoveling the eggs out of his mouth with my hands, and I crushed them with my feet as they fell to the ground. It was slimy and cold inside of his mouth. I gagged from the texture, but kept shoveling. His color started to come back, but not his consciousness. I grabbed him and threw him on my back. He wasn't light, but with my adrenaline pumping, he wasn't too heavy either. I went to what looked like my grandpa, but unlike my brother, his eyes were black. A deep, dark black. His skin was entirely blue, with too many veins to count, and he was cold. He didn't only have eggs in his stretched out mouth, but also in little bubbles covering his skin. I think whatever happened to him happened a while ago, and it was too late to save him. I creaked the shed door open again, but what I saw, I'll never forget. It looked like my grandma, the top half of her anyway. She was now incredibly tall, maybe 10 feet. Her skin was blue and almost looked like a suit, like it didn't fit her body quite right, and she was leaning to the side a bit. She bore the same egg-filled bubbles my grandpa had. Her lower half was green, slimy, veiny legs, 4 of them, with sharp hairs prickling down each leg, almost like that of an insect. She moved quickly, and even quicker as she noticed me. Her footsteps sounded like high heels on concrete. As she moved closer, her human skin began to shed, revealing 4 glassy eyes on a rounded head, a toothy smile, and even antennas. I shut the door and tried to look around for a weapon. There were countless glass bottles, as well as a tank of gasoline, rags for cleaning, and you guessed it, a lighter. I guess Grandpa hadn't quit smoking after all. I remembered a video I'd seen once on YouTube about how to make a homemade Molotov cocktail. Don't ask. The whole down the YouTube rabbit hole thing, you know? I laid my brother down and began to combine the ingredients. I popped open the glass bottle, poured the gasoline inside, and shoved the rag into the opening, creating an airtight barrier. I then pocketed the lighter. Afterwards, I poured the rest of the gasoline out onto all the cocooned people. I wept a little for my grandpa. He didn't deserve this, but there was nothing else I could do. As I poured the gas, the little eggs started to hatch and screamed as they did. I could hear the footsteps getting close. I grabbed my brother with one arm and held the Molotov in the other. I kicked some of the loose wood in the back of the shed and ran. I glanced back and saw my grandma entering the shed. I dropped my brother and grabbed a lighter from my pocket, lit the Molotov, and threw it into the shed. All at once, everything went quiet, and then a big boom as the tiny rotting shed exploded. All I could hear was screaming. My own, my grandma's, all the tiny egg babies. I looked down and my brother was still unconscious. I bent down to pick him up, but I heard rustling in the grass. I quickly looked up and saw my insect grandma still running towards me. I unfortunately hadn't thought of a plan B. I'm a child, not a war tactic genius. This was it. I laid down and held hands with my brother. I felt him squeeze back, as if to say, "You did all you could." I smiled and closed my eyes. Then, gunshots. I heard insect grandma scream, her chittering loud, and then quiet. I jumped up and saw my parents. I grabbed my brother and ran to them. We met in the middle, hugs all around, and I was so relieved to see them. "What are you doing here?" I half yelled, half cried. "Everyone, bugs, everyone." My father mustered out. I looked at my mom, the same scared expression etched onto her face. My dad grabbed my brother from me, and we ran back to the car. Both of us trying to explain our situation to the other. From what I could gather, the night my parents left us at the cottage hadn't ended the way we thought. They apparently stopped for gas on the way home and discovered a similar cocoon nightmare. Only those eggs had hatched completely, and my parents had to fight their way out and back to us. They said they checked the news via their cell phones and found out this was not an isolated event. What was happening to us was happening everywhere. We all packed into the car. I asked him where he was taking us, but he didn't answer. I don't think even he knew, but anywhere was better than this dusty, vine-infested, and now bug-gut-filled cottage. Hope you enjoyed that very random story. It honestly was a lot easier to use the sounds than I thought it was going to be. Once I started writing, everything just sort of fell together. I'm not the greatest writer, and I much prefer drawing, but I am very happy with the way this story turned out. As always, please like the video if you like the art and the story, and subscribe if you haven't. Until the next video, bye!